from 1823. And I have the original, I think, deed of the property. We also have several deeds that are original from the early 1800s. When they bought the land, they were given a deed that was supposedly signed by the president. Well, that's probably somebody else's signature, but it has the president's name on it. So we've got several of those that have either James Monroe or James Madison's name on them.
Great, perfect, thank you. Okay, we're good.
Okay, Stephen, we're on the other side of the hallway now. Can you kind of tell us a little bit
Sure.
about this thing?
Well, this doorway here was not here originally. This was put in 1855 when they changed the road and put the road on this side of the house, and this then became the front of the house. So they had to have installed this in about 1855, and it's got these side lights, and from the outside you can see there's a decorative lintel, they call it, across the top. But this then became the primary entrance. We know that wasn't there originally because this stairway behind me, when we put the wallpaper on, or my mother did in the 1970s, when she stripped the old wallpaper off, she could see where the stairway had gone. And the original stairway started here and went up this wall, and then there was a landing that came across right here, and then it went on up to the top. So when they put the door here, they obviously had to move the stairway. So they moved the stairway over here. And we can see that that's probably the case too, because if you look up there, they wouldn't have built that originally and cut the door off like that, where it angles down across the doorway. So this was obviously installed later. But yeah, all that work was done in sometime in the 1850s. It's pretty clean, that's for sure. I mean, you don't have anything blowing around in here, but it's not real efficient.
Yeah.
Okay, we're good.
All right, Stephen, so we're in another room now. Can you tell us where we are?
Okay, well, this is originally would have been a parlor. Pretty typical of the Federal style house. They had a parlor on one side, and these two rooms here were you could open them up through this big doorway. Obviously, this was a fireplace at one point, but this one was filled in when we put they put the furnace in I believe it was 1919 when the furnace went in. They had to use the flue hooked into the furnace, so they had to seal this one over. But this was one of the 4 fireplaces downstairs originally. But as I mentioned, this is typical of a parlor that they had back then, and here's something that I put these up the other day too. I found these doors. There's 2 of these doors here, the parlor doors. These were out in a barn, had not been up in my whole lifetime. So my brother and I put these back up, just again for kind of historic purposes. I thought it was kind of interesting to be able to find those, and they still fit pretty well. But this would have been the other part of the parlor, and of course they use those big doors so they could close off one side or the other when they had visitors or for privacy or whatever.
Super. Okay.
All right, Stephen, can you explain this side of the parlor?
Okay, again, this is the other side of the parlor. As I mentioned, these big doors here we just put back on. They'd been taken down for many years, and I can see why, because they tend to get in the way of any kind of furniture you would have in here. So I'm sure they just took them all off, but we thought it would be interesting to put them back up. And one of the 4 fireplaces down here, this room was used as a living room when my grandparents and parents lived here. Again, the fireplace very functional. The doors were put on in the 1970s, but fireplaces are very effective in heating the downstairs. If you have 2 or 3 of these running at once, it really keeps the place warm.
Now, as you mentioned a little bit ago, there's a furnace in here. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
Well, the furnace was put in the about 1919. They dug a part of the basement and put a furnace in. I'm not sure whether that furnace was the hot water type or not. I mean, that's what this heating system is now, hot water. There's a boiler in the basement that heats the water that then comes up through the pipes and then heats these registers which heat the rooms in the house. This system's been in here for 60, 70 years probably. very clean, of course. Doesn't put out any, doesn't blow any air around or anything, but it can be somewhat expensive to heat an old house like this. No insulation in this house. All these walls are just 3 bricks thick, so there's no insulation except in the attic.
Huh. It must have been a little bit tricky getting those pipes in, seeing as the walls are all brick.
Well, it is, and the wiring all either runs through behind the baseboard or it runs under the floors. Upstairs we'll see plank floors where we had to take the plank floors up to put the wiring, or when they did it originally, they put wiring underneath of those, or it runs up behind the baseboard or the trim along the doors. But yes, anytime you're trying to do any kind of plumbing or wiring, it's kind of a challenge. Originally, this house had lots of shingles on it on the outside, which we can look at later. I've got all of those out in the barn. There's probably 40 shingles out there that I had thought of putting some of those back up at some point, but haven't got to that yet.
Good. Thank you. We're good.
All right, Stephen, we're upstairs now. Can you tell us where we are?
Okay, this is one of the bedrooms on the upstairs level. There were 4 bedrooms up here, the central hallway, and then 2 bedrooms on each side, which is typical of this federal style house. 2 of these have fireplaces. Obviously this is one of them. I've never seen this fireplace work in my whole lifetime. I mean, it obviously did years ago. They'd probably get up in the morning or late in the evening before they go to bed, they might build a fire, and then in the morning they'd build a fire to knock off the chill. These closets were not here originally. The closets were put in later on, but originally in a house like this you'd have wood wardrobes that they put their clothes in. But most of the bedrooms have at least one closet that's been put in. The windows upstairs are a little different than the ones downstairs. They're not quite as tall. That's kind of typical of the style of the house also.
The floors are a little different.
Oh yeah, the floors. These are plank. These are original. The floors downstairs would not have been original floors, but these are. They always put these plank floors, and I think every room up here has the original plank floor in it.
I noticed one of the bricks in the fireplace has a number on it. Is that 1823? Is that what that says? Over on the right-hand side?
It does, that's right. 1823.
That's the date of
That's the date the house was built, right. They finished it in December of 1823 and moved in, and they didn't have I don't think the plaster on the inside was all done yet, but the house was livable at least where they could move into it.
Okay, great. Okay, we're ready.
All right, Stephen, so we're in another bedroom upstairs. Can you tell us where we are?
Okay, this is the other bedroom with the fireplace, obviously. Very similar to the one we were just in. This closet would not have been here originally. This was added at some point later. I'm not sure exactly when. These are fairly good sized bedrooms, a lot of area to move around in a room like this. Plank floors, again, were the original floors. So very similar to the one we were just in.
Now this lady who's over the bed is somebody that's kind of important.
Yeah, this picture is of Margaret Black. That's the woman who built the house. She was my great-great-grandmother. One that came over here in 1822 and came cross country with her brothers and her family and started a new life. It's hard to imagine coming that far and leaving everything that you've got and coming to wild lands of the frontier and not knowing what you're getting into. So, one thing I still kind of amazed at is where, to build a house like this would not have been cheap back then, and I'm not sure where they got their money to do that. I mean, buying the land was pretty, $1.25 an acre is what they paid for the land, which isn't very much. But to build a house like this had to cost them several $1,000s. And I'm not sure where she got the money to do that. I guess her family must have done all right in England before they came over here.